Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Even as OMB rethinks how it frames enterprise risk management, the risks themselves aren't going anywhere, and agencies can't afford to treat ERM as a compliance exercise. Here to discuss how federal leaders can keep enterprise risk considerations front and center is the current president of the Association for Federal Enterprise Risk Management, Dr. Karen Hardy. Karen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Let's start with the landscape, because enterprise risk management has been around for a while. What are you hearing about it with federal agencies in 2025?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show to talk about this. Enterprise risk management is embedded in operations, in government operations, nonprofit organizations, partnering organizations that work with government agencies. So it's still present within the government. The question is, who's responsible for ensuring that it's a continuity of the practice of enterprise risk management at all levels of government? Because as you know, risk management hasn't gone anywhere. Risk is every day. We wake up, we're dealing with risk. And just the risk itself is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And government agencies have plenty of objectives. They have strategic objectives, program objectives, project objectives. So we have to understand what those risks are to those objectives at all levels of government. So while we have risk management as a practice, enterprise risk management is a more mature level of risk management. So risk still exists. Still have to manage it, and that's why a firm association is in place to help government leaders continue to apply that skill set to their job.
Well, you're absolutely right. There hasn't been any diminishment in risk to federal agencies. We talk about it every day. But
Right.
For a long time, ERM was sort of a compliance checklist. Do you feel like agencies are getting better at integrating it into routine practice?
Over time it has. I've seen the exponential growth of where we started years ago to where we are today in terms of where enterprise risk management had been integrated and included in agency operations at the strategy and operational levels. We've seen that in the strategic planning process. We've seen agencies actually grow into applying enterprise risk management techniques and practices in the budget process, in the budget setting. So that's huge. That's a huge win and progress of growth of enterprise risk management practice in government setting.
With that in mind, OMB recently took ERM out of Circular A123 and moved it into an internal controls approach. What message do you think that sends to the broader federal agency enterprise?
Well, from my perspective, what the message is that there's a lot of confidence that a lot of executives already know how to do this. If you're removing it from, guidance, and it is in step with the maturing of ERM over time, then there's a sense of confidence that executives are aware of this skill and should come to the table with this skill. So my expectation, and probably everyone else's, is that this will continue to move forward, whether it's written down on paper or not. As we said, risk still exists, and you have to look at risk just not from a silo perspective, but from an enterprise perspective. So we're betting on with the expectation that executives come fully aware and prepared to manage risk that way.
So you're not concerned that by taking it out of that explicit guidance, it's a de-emphasizing of the ERM approach?
I don't think it's a de-emphasizing as much as it is a reminder that you have to look at risk across an organization. That's very important. And we have to remember that executives are people, and it's just not our nature to think about things from a cross-cutting view automatically. So removing that language from the document does have an effect of, what's top of mind when you start thinking about risk. I think it has an effect on that as a reminder of this is what you need to do. Else we're creatures of habit. We go back to just looking at risk within our silos. So removal of the language does have an impact in terms of how you mentally think about risk management. But as I said before, risk is here. And organizations, especially executives, need to look at risk across an organization. The ERM language was there to remind them to do that. Without that, then we're with the expectation that executives understand that must continue and that they will continue to do that.
I'm speaking with Dr. Karen Hardy. She's the Principal and Chief Risk Officer of Strategic Leadership Advisors and the current President of the Association for Federal Enterprise Risk Management. So, Karen, let's talk about ERM. You're the president right now. What is on your agenda for the organization?
Well, first of all, we're excited. We're excited because, one, I'm one of those people that's been around for a long time and engaged with this organization when it was just a movement, in a sense, in federal government. So we've gone from first identifying and using ERM as an informal tool chest to that's being required in federal agencies, and now to the point where we're embracing our partnership with state and local government employees in terms of upskilling them in the area of enterprise risk management. So we're working with our own state and local committee to start to integrate enterprise risk management at the state and local levels, and they're very excited to partner with us.
Is that a shift for ERM to now focus at state and local government levels?
It's more so a shift and a necessity because, as you know, federal government has been shifting or pushing down a lot of federal requirements down to state and local areas. So that means that those state and local government representatives need to be ready and understand how do you manage risk to these things like critical infrastructure and things of that nature. So we're excited to, have the bumps and the bruises through all of our experience and the blueprint to help state and local government implement enterprise risk management.
So how are you keeping ERM sort of front and center for all of your various constituencies?
Well, one of the things is recognizing how risk language is still being integrated into various policies. Like we had the Federal Agency Performance Act, which was a bipartisan act passed in December 2024, which emphasizes risk management pertaining to strategy and strategic reviews. We have recent executive orders supporting risk-based rulemaking for operating drones as part of the national airspace and normalizing what they call beyond visual line of sight operations. So risk management is there. It will be impossible not to look at risk across an organization as risk is continually embedded in acts and guidance and just mere practice of government operations.
Well, you've got the ERM Summit coming up in October. What is the theme for this year and how does that tie in?
I'm excited about this ERM Summit because this is our virtual summit, and the theme is Mission Possible, Unlocking the Future of Enterprise Risk Management. We are 25 years into the millennium and 5 years away from a new decade. That's incredible. So we're not sitting back, we're taking the lead, and we created this bigger table virtually, which invites enterprise risk management professionals to the table to talk about the future and then talk about what their best practices have been across these different sectors and how public sector can look at these best practices and adopt them.
Can you share any preview of sessions you're particularly looking forward to?
I wish I could tell you right now, but we're not quite ready. But I would encourage everyone to visit our website at affirm.org. That's AFERM.org, and to see what our schedule is right now in terms of the topics. And I think they'll be very interested and excited to, attend this and have this seat at this virtual table to help define the future. It only happens once in a lifetime. So this is the opportunity to be a part of this event.
Well, we'll look forward to that, Karen. And as we kind of wrap this up, what would be your advice or your elevator pitch, maybe to executives at any level of government who are a little skeptical about ERM? What would you say to them to convince them that they really need to do it and it matters? Well,
you can't manage risk in the silos. You really can't do that. The enterprise risk management is more of a mindset than anything else. You have to take into consideration how risk impacts other parts of your organization. Would you rather manage with less information and blind spots? I don't think so. You have to be confident about your decisions, and having the data to support that with risk management data is extremely important, especially in this day of time, because the landscape is continually shifting locally and globally.
I have been speaking with Dr. Karen Hardy. She's the Principal and Chief Risk Officer of Strategic Leadership Advisors and the current President of the Association for Federal Enterprise Risk Management. Karen, it is great to have you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former Senior Advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals and the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites and airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody, period, end of story, within the organization. Really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. As a third-generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down, and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics, and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one. Coming from the insurance industry, that's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business. And more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge? And how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career, I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy. It's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. Who is one person, someone you know personally or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it, share the credit, perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has pearls of wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life, like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.